Okay, here we are talking about The Boys Season 1, Episode 1. I'm going to do basically just a rundown of the events of this episode, and I'll have some neat little bits and observations along the way. One thing I'll start off by saying is I remember many years ago, before the first of the new wave of Superman movies came out, I read a script by Kevin Smith, who, by the way, has got some great behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories in his career. But he wrote a script for the new Superman, and he started it off with this action scene. And then it cut from that to kind of like background, how it built up to that action moment. And I thought that was a really good format. I really liked the original Superman, but it wasn't paced very well. I watched it again recently, which is interesting because I could see a lot of homages to the original Superman in The Boys here. But it was really slow. It started off, it really dragged, and it was really slow. And I think modern films have a different expectation as far as pacing goes. And The Boys here does a good job with that. They start right off the bat with an action scene. The very first scene is actually two kids talking to each other about superheroes, which is also pretty good. It kind of demonstrates that it's part of the world, something that kids would talk about. Just like if superheroes are part of the world, it would be a thing we talked about. So suddenly this armored car comes careening down the road. It's about to hit the kids. Bank robbers inside. Maeve comes. Homelander comes. They save the day. And then they take a moment for a photo op, which this is very different than how, the traditional purely good superheroes like Superman would have handled things. They levy out punishment right then and there. Homelander punches this guy into oblivion, where Superman would have turned him in. It's also a little reckless because the guy just lands in a distance on some car that might have had a passenger and could have get injured. Now, right off the bat, we're not necessarily thinking about these details. Homelander's being presented as a good guy. We go to the next scene, and it introduces Huey, and he's kind of our central focal point, I would say. And we kind of see him as an average guy, maybe a timid guy, and his interactions at work with his girlfriend. And then the plot thickens with the first oh snap moment when she just gets disintegrated by A-Train running by. Her name, by the way, was Robin Ward, and I can't get over the fact that must have some kind of meaning. Obviously, all these superheroes are parallels to other known superheroes. Homelander is clearly Superman. It seems like Black Noir is probably Batman. I guess maybe Butcher is Batman, maybe Punisher. Some might be debatable. A-Train is the Flash, or, there might be the Marvel or DC counterparts. But anyway, her name is Robin. Obviously, there's a Batman and Robin, and her name is Robin Ward. And if you ever saw the old 60s Batman, that Robin was played by Burt Ward. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but anyway, that's our first hint that maybe this world isn't all happy-go-lucky with the superheroes. And I like the design, the structure of this first episode. It did a good job. Fundamentally, it's going back and forth between Starlight and Huey. Huey is basically, through the course of this episode, joining forces against the Supes, whereas Starlight is joining with the Supes. Now, they are both coming from a sort of, we'll say, a naive perspective and waking up to the reality of who the Supes really are, even though one is joining up with them and one is going against them. It's very interesting, and most of the scenes cut back and forth between them. The next scene we see is her training, and again, in homage to Superman, she lifts a car up over her head. Interesting, again, a subtle little thing that you might not think anything about until you see where it's going, but she's making a sort of an application to the Seven, and she has to name her height and her weight. Like that should matter at all for, whether or not you're strong or can save lives, or if you're a good person or have superpowers, but how attractive you are seems to make a difference. It's kind of cynical, but you can see there's a reality to that. Also, just a neat note here that her mother is Ann Cusack, who is sister to Joan and John Cusack. Quite the acting family there. So then we go next to Huey and his dad, by the way, Simon Pegg. Simon Pegg originally was supposed to play Huey's character, but they decided he was too old, and it took about 4 years to get the initial idea for this show into actual production, which meant he aged even more. But neat that he still got to be part of the show. And again, a little more revealing of Huey's character here, and maybe his timid nature. And he meets with this lawyer, which again is the first hint that there's a dark side to these superheroes in the first place. And I also really appreciate the perspective of Huey that they're showing. It's basically PTSD that he's going through. It's hard for him to get over that incredibly violent moment that he was a witness to. That, again, a lot of times, I say again, I haven't talked about this here, but I talked about it in my intro to The Boys, that it's something I appreciate about the show is that it's a little bit more realistic in the presentation of how people behave. That when funny things happen in real life, we laugh at it, we talk about that funny things, usually like later in the same day, and often weeks down the road it might become an inside joke or whatever. Same thing, a traumatic thing, a scary thing, it keeps being part of us. It keeps running through our minds, and we keep wanting to talk about it or maybe trying to forget it. But anyway, a dark element of this show is that there's a real psychological difference to these violent moments that happen, and I appreciate that they show Huey trying to deal with that. And again, jumping back and forth, we see Annie get accepted to the Seven, and then we see Huey and his dad again, kind of a neat mother-daughter, father-son parallel, and the mother seems to be really propping Annie up, and the father is kind of like questioning Huey when he's, resistant to signing this NDA with this lawyer that comes. But anyway, we then see Annie in her acceptance ceremony speech, and the setup to which is this basically a pitch that Madeline, played by Elizabeth Shue, is making to an audience, and it seems like she's more concerned with shareholders and the potential for marketing than the idea of safety or freedom or crime fighting. It's kind of a win-win, if she gets to have this entity, this enterprise of crime fighting, and she gets to make money off of it, and they get to produce movies, and the superheroes are rich. Well, hey, it's good for everyone if everyone's safer. Obviously, we see the dark side of this, but that's the first hint at more happening here than meets the eye. Annie makes her debut there, and then we see, again, the dark side. Behind the scenes, she runs into the Deep, and he basically does the thing that it's just been happening in society forever, and in the past few years, we're becoming aware of it, and there's this whole Me Too movement against it. And you see it kind of play out here, and it's just kind of sickening. It's really something that, I said in my intro to The Boys in general, is that these are the type of social issues that this show is tackling, that I appreciate, that I think it's important, but also the type of thing that's not really for kids. But I don't know, maybe we shouldn't shield kids from this too much, but not 7-year-olds at least. Anyway, we then move on to see Huey get introduced to the Butcher. And he obviously presents himself as being part of the law, but really he's just a vigilante, which again is kind of in the vein of Batman or maybe the Punisher, some other character. I think it's also interesting here that they make a Matrix reference. Again, something that people in real life do relate things that are happening to them to things that they've seen in literature, movies, TV, or whatever. I like to see when the characters in a show or a movie do that themselves. Also, by the way, the Butcher is played by Carl Urban. It took me a minute to figure out where he was from, but I guess he's probably in things other than what I realized, but he was the Bones in the retrofitted Star Trek, new set of Star Trek movies. A similar kind of tough but cynical character. I think he does a good job. So we then go back to seeing Starlight herself being sick over what just happened with the Deep, Maeve sees her kind of disheveled and tells her to pull it together, don't let them see you like this. Incidentally, this is the passing of the Bechdel test, something I've become aware of in the past few years, something I look out for, I appreciate. A lot of shows maybe barely pass it. Passing the Bechdel test doesn't necessarily excuse you from elements of sexism, but I do feel like this show fundamentally is trying to address elements of sexism, but they specifically pass the Bechdel test right here. Another kind of dark moment is the realization that Translucent was in the bathroom the whole time that the women were in there, something that might be another red flag for Starlight. So we see Huey, we see the Butcher then wanting Huey to go plant a bug. And we also see Huey's lack of self-confidence, probably coming from his father's attitude toward him, keep him from doing it. His dad told him he wasn't a fighter, and here we see him not having the guts the Butcher wants him to have to go plant this bug. Then we get a cut to a different little segment here. We see Madeline. This is kind of a deviation from the back and forth between Huey and Starlight. We see Madeline, who's the head of Vought, who seems to be the management company of the superheroes, including the Seven. We see her meeting with the mayor of Baltimore, and they seem to be negotiating having a superhero sent to Baltimore. And that was like a very interesting thing for me. It's part of what hooked me on this show, the idea that that's probably what would happen in real life if there really were superheroes. There would be some finagling, some politicization, however you say that, of where the superheroes went, why they went to one place or another, who would pay for it, what political campaigns would be behind it, what types of benefits would be offered to the superheroes or their agents to get them to go from one city to another, whether it's payment or charitable support or promises of protection from legal repercussions of damages they cause or privacy laws being passed against paparazzi. You can imagine all the types of things that might actually matter to the day-to-day life of a superhero and of maybe more ominous entities surrounding superheroes, especially when you think of the idea that they're going to send one superhero to Baltimore instead of Atlanta, and I guess maybe these sort of decisions have to be made, but the idea that they're going to be made over contracts of hundreds of millions of dollars that some corporate entity gets a benefit from, some shaky ground. It really stirred my mind a lot about how this should work, about how our actual military and police work, the effects of celebrities and politicians. Maybe I'm even going too deep for this, action show, but that's where my mind went anyway. So one quick little thing that happened in that scene, you might not notice if you aren't paying attention, but you see in the window outside where they're discussing this, you see Homelander fly by. And, imagine that he has some super hearing and maybe some ends on the behind-the-scenes knowledge that Madeline has. And he probably overheard this mayor from Baltimore kind of attempting to blackmail Madeline over something that we don't know anything about yet, but Compound V. She doesn't admit to anything, but certainly that's not the end of this. We then go back to Huey and Butcher. Huey decides he is going to plant this bug. I guess that's as a result of his conversation with Starlight. I forgot that we see Starlight on the phone with her mom, not knowing how to tell her about what just happened with the Deep. Kind of her image of her future was shattered. She doesn't know how to communicate this with her mom, who she seems to have a close relationship with. And it just so happens that Huey's right there, also kind of stewing over his personal difficulties. They bond a little bit, kind of superficially, and he kind of convinces her to do the right thing, if you will, and she decides that she's a fighter. And that kind of inspires Huey to be a fighter too. He goes back to Butcher. Okay, I'll do it. It's going to set this bug. So they go back or go to the Seven's compound to set up this meeting with A-Train, who clearly isn't actually sorry. And part of what's motivating Huey to do this is he knows that it just seems to be for money. He doesn't care about the money. He's upset about the idea that this could happen and that they don't even really care about it. And so despite his, timid nature, he's going to make this big play. He's been inspired by the Butcher and by Annie, aka Starlight. He doesn't know that yet, to try to take things into his own hands. And again, we see Translucent be a witness to what he's done. He does it, and the Butcher's done with him. Draws him off of work. All right, buddy, thanks for your help. Hey, I can do more. No, don't need you. And then we see Translucent, we sort of see Translucent come in to the shop, and happily for me, the first real action scene, other than that opening scene, which is pretty short, we get our next action scene. And I'm glad the whole episode wasn't just pounding action and special effects down our throat. It was a little bit at the beginning, a little bit at the end. Reminds me of Rocky, the original Rocky movie. People think of that as an action movie, as a boxing movie. There's only 2 fights in that whole movie, the very beginning and the very end. It was really a drama. But anyway, so we see this interesting, non-standard action scene. We get this invisible person and a little callback to a moment where we saw Jimmy Kimmel, a neat little... or Jimmy Fallon rather, not Jimmy Kimmel, neat little cameo he had interviewing Translucent, and Huey had seen that and knew that he had some sort of carbon skin and it would be conductive, and so he zaps him. And now we get to next oh snap moment, maybe even 2 in a row, because you might count that as an oh snap moment when Huey realizes that, oh, I just took down a superhero, and also the Butcher's not really with the police, he's just a dude. And then we immediately after that see that Homelander might be the biggest villain of all. We see him in the sky with his laser beams shoot down that plane that had the mayor of Baltimore with his kid, and we're pretty sure the Homelander knew the kid was on there. It's all pretty dark and quite a setup for where the show is going. They even really kind of got us with that, because earlier I kind of glossed over it a little too quick, I suppose, but earlier when Annie first meets the Seven, they're kind of bickering over their rights and her percentages of the movie profits and stuff. And again, that's maybe another little red flag. But Homelander quiets that down and says, hey, come on, what are we bickering over? What kind of impression are we giving Starlight here? What I want to hear about is, who did you save today? And that kind of reinforces him as a good guy. And the Butcher even told Huey that they're all bad except for Homelander. He's the exception. So they really set us up to believe that Homelander is a true White Knight character. But he's clearly not. Clearly not in that final scene. So anyway, hopefully some of my little tidbits of trivia and observations were worth you listening to my little video here. And we'll see what I can pick up on in the next few episodes.